Hello, everyone. It's Matt Schlapp, and welcome to America Uncanceled on CPAC Now. There's no more important issue as we get closer and closer to this all-important election, presidential election, national election coming up in November, than these outrageous videos we all can see on our news feeds, on television, coming from various parts of the border. This is having a huge impact on politics everywhere around the country, especially in these border states like Arizona and Texas. Our next guest is someone who I would consider to be an expert about the outrageous, irresponsible, and dangerous policies that Joe Biden has put into effect along the border. Julio Rosas, who's with Mostly Peaceful Live, is with us now. Julio, I know this is a relatively new perch for you that gives you the freedom to go out there and cover these stories. What's the latest on what's going on the border?
Well, right now we're just kind of waiting and seeing how this year is going to pan out. The incoming winter storms has kind of put a damper on the crossings, and that typically happens in January, especially with the holidays and everything. Because believe it or not, the human smugglers and cartels also celebrate during that time. But really, what is going to happen this year is that obviously, with the election, as you mentioned, is going to be later in November. People are going to really start to make their decisions if whether or not they're going to follow what the hundreds of millions of people who have done so already. And so I suspect that with the recent caravan that left southern Mexico, we're going to see a lot more of those because people are going to want to make sure that they get into the country through these illegal means while it's still for sure under the Biden administration. And so there's a lot of reasons why we've seen this uptake in December, even when we're looking at recent history. The Texas state law that Governor Abbott signed empowering law enforcement to arrest illegal aliens simply based off of their legal status is another kind of incentive for people to go into Texas before March.
Am I right that the very first place that there's such tumult and chaos is in these border towns? We've seen some of these towns, elect Republican mayors. We see these polls that show Hispanic voters are changing their approach to how they think about the Republican Party vis-a-vis the Democratic Party, Trump and Biden. You've been down there a lot. Have you seen evidence that these illegal crossings are causing problems for what should be Democrat constituencies?
Yeah, and I'll give an example. There was what happens during these massive crossings when it's particularly in one location. What we've seen is the ports of entry, the legal ports of entry, having to be closed because customs agents or customs officers who man the ports have to be redirected to help Border Patrol. And so that affects the economy. I mean, we're no longer talking about just people going through trespassing through neighborhoods and ranches and causing all sorts of problems there, but now just people on both sides of the border, Americans and Mexicans, are now inconvenienced at a minimum. But at the worst part of it is the economic damage that the border towns rely on. That kind of trade and commerce and tourism, basically that is spent on the U.S. side and even on the Mexican side. So the economy is bad enough as it is, but when they add, a place like Eagle Pass losing millions of dollars every time that these ports of entries and these international bridges are closed, I mean, people really start to take notice and they start to think, well, hey, why is this happening? Is this really how things need to be now? And that's why they're looking for, when they look at what Republicans say about what they're going to do, should a Republican take back the White House.
So what you're saying is when the legal port of entry is closed, the legal commerce and the legal immigration closes along with the processing of these people who are seeking asylum or whatever?
Yeah, yes. Just because like what we saw in Eagle Pass last month, there were so many people that they had to use an entire field right next to the international bridge. And it was looking eerily similar to the Del Rio Haitian bridge crisis in 2021. And that caused all sorts of problems back there too. It never reached that point over in Eagle Pass, but just the fact that we're kind of getting the deja vu within a short period of time is very stark.
So I've seen recently from media outlets I trust interviews or at least short exchanges with illegals who are about ready to cross or who have crossed, just looking like they come from all over the globe. And when they say the countries they come from, it's just all over the place. It's Africa, it's Asia, it's the Middle East. This used to be seen as mostly a Western Hemisphere, Central America, Mexico question. When did this become the whole globe coming here?
It's just simply the fact that after 2021, everyone was seeing that because back in 2021 it was mostly Central Americans, but then we
Right.
started to see some South Americans starting to come too. And then 2022 is really when people realize like, oh, we can do the same thing too because everyone else is getting through, and that's where we kind of saw the Haitians in Del Rio as an example of that. But it's the reason why is just because the Biden administration just seems to take this approach that, well, we just need to get everybody in and then process them later and get them through the system much later. And that's why when you see Secretary Mayorkas and other people within the Biden administration saying, well, this isn't just an American problem. We're seeing massive migration events all over the world. And it's like, well, of course, because in part because you're the ones
Yeah.
causing this. You're the ones who have rang the dinner bell, so to speak, to let everyone know. And I've met people as far away as Russia, Uzbekistan. It just wild. I've met some Chinese people from China. It's just crazy when
Do
you
they
actually
all
go down
pay
there.
a member of the cartel, a mule, a go-between? Is it big money for those people that can like transport these folks to the border?
Yes, typically the further your country is away from Mexico or the southern border, the more that the criminal organizations will charge you just because, depending on where they're coming from, they might have more money. Like, for example, in China, they charge tens of thousands of dollars in some cases for just one person. And you see some of them bringing over, two, three of their family members. I mean, it can get pretty expensive for them, which brings in the question of, okay, well, why are you coming here if you can afford something like that? But yeah, that's typically how it works. Central Americans and Mexicans, they're in the thousands of dollars, a couple thousand, but the further away you get, the more expensive it is, just because the logistics of getting to Mexico and then to the United States is obviously a lot more. So that's why there's a surcharge with that.
The other thing that popped on Twitter in the last 24 hours is what looked like proof that the hearings that these people get told, hey, come on into the country, here's some new clothes, here's all the lawyers you can call to, get around our laws. Here's Obamacare, here's Obama phone, blah, blah, blah. They're also being told that their hearings are years in the future. Is this a urban legend, or is this actually happening where they're told, yeah, you can come have the ability to stay in America and you might not have to go to a courtroom for 5 years?
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely true. And now it's five is kind of the low end. That's actually now sooner just because there's so many people. Now we're seeing 6, 7, in some cases even 10 years from now. And so what's not really being talked about now is the fact that we're going to have a whole new generation of basically DACA. We've barely, as a country, have kind of solved the first generation back in the 2010s. But with all the kids that are very young right now that are being brought over, they're going to make the same arguments. Like, hey, well, we need a legal pathway because I was brought over as a kid. This is the only country I've ever known. I only know English and all this other stuff. And that's why even if say Trump takes back the White House, this is going to be a decades long problem just within these next 4 years. And I really am worried of the ability for the nation to address this should this be allowed to continue for another 4 years. Just because within these 4 years, just now, is going to cause massive problems and massive headaches, even if we have, let's say, a Republican administration for the next 8 years. I mean, that's how massive a problem it is, and that's why it's by design. It's by design. This is not happening by accident. This is very much being done purposefully. We all know this. And it's very, as you said at the beginning, this next election is very, very important, even just on this one issue. But of course, there's a plethora of other issues that have gotten worse under the Biden administration.
So, Julio, what does this mean in terms of what the Republicans can do? Obviously, Republicans, it sure looks like, aren't willing to shut down the government over the border. They all talk about how important it is to close the border, but really, there's enough weak Republicans in the House conference and I guess when you become a senator, unless you're like Senator Lee or Cruz or Rick Scott or a few others, being a senator makes you be soft on these types of questions. So if they're not going to use the purse strings to shut down the border, the next question is impeaching Mayorkas. What's your take on where that sits in the House?
So the House Homeland Security Committee is having their first official impeachment hearing tomorrow. They've had basically the fact-finding evidence hearings last year, and so that's why they're now moving forward with this. That's why those 8 Republicans voted against Marjorie Taylor Greene's impeachment articles last year, because they were saying that they were saying, well, they felt uncomfortable because they didn't feel like due process was being followed. And so I was with Speaker Johnson and his delegation last week in Eagle Pass, and I was asking about this. I said, hey, do you guys think you have the votes now to actually have this go through? And they said once the impeachment hearings are concluded, they're pretty confident. Chairman Mark Green said as much as that. He thought that they'll have the votes. Now, of course, what happens after that? I mean, because even by some miracle he actually does get removed, who does he replace with, or who does he get replaced with, and are they going to actually do anything different? And that's why, at the end of the day, if this problem is going to be solved, there needs to be a change in the administration at the White House at the end of the day.
Totally agree. I mean, the way constitutional power has worked, whether by hook or by crook, is Congress has ceded a lot of its authority to the executive branch. And part of this problem is that Republicans think shutdown is a dirty word. What's your take on that? I know that's not an issue that you necessarily cover, but if you have such a lawless administration, such a lawless president, what can Republicans do beyond just say, okay, we're closing the purse strings?
I mean, I definitely understand the frustration. Because that does seem kind of like a last resort to do. More than anything, I just feel bad for the government agents, the Border Patrol, who would have to go without pay with that. But even then, they're starting to think like, they're seeing this every day, and they also are thinking like, well, there's no other way to get the administration's attention on this except maybe through this option. I mean, it's a matter of whether or not the Republican conference is strong enough to withstand the absurd attacks from the Democrats and from the media should a shutdown happen. Because we kind of been through this before under the Trump administration. So I would say that they should. I mean, this is not going to go away unless dramatic action is taken. I'll just leave it at that.
Julio, we appreciate the great work you do. I think it's very important for us to focus on the talent of people like yourself that are actually going to these places and doing the research and covering the story. There's so many places we can turn to besides just turning immediately on our television dial to corporate media that wants to sugarcoat some of these messages. So God bless you for the work you're doing. I know sometimes it's dangerous too.
That's part of the job, and I enjoy it for what it is. And if people want to support me, they can go to mostlypeaceful.live.
They should do that. And I hope you're going to be with us at CPAC this year in February.
Yes, you'll see me there.
Awesome, man. Thanks for joining us. Julio Rosas, mostlypeaceful.live is where you find Julio, and you're also going to find him at CPAC. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of America Uncanceled. I promise to be back with Mercedes in our next show, or at least soon. And have a great day, and God bless.